Alright, guys, so here again we are going through some history. And remember, this section is about World War II in Europe. It is the final chapter, okay? And we are looking at the reasons for the outbreak of war in Europe. We know that the war in Europe broke out in September 1939, and that is where we are working towards. We already know that in Europe there was this body called the League of Nations, which was supposed to stop any conflict, but it couldn't. We also know that the aggressor means the person who was basically being aggressive, the one who started the war, okay, the one who we can blame for the war, because if you start it, then you are to blame, right? We know that it was Hitler, and we have covered all the different reasons, how he expanded, and the significance of his expansionist policy. Remember, he was getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and he would become bolder and more daring, and therefore eventually lead to invading Poland, which was the trigger of the war. And of course, the last lesson we also looked at, even though how Hitler was so aggressive and he was expanding, nobody was stopping him. And that is going to be the focus for today. At the end of this lesson, I will also go through a quick overview of what I think is the most important reason. Okay, so let's go. We are going to look at the policy of appeasement, the policy being something which you go by. Okay, it is a principle which the Allied powers act by. Okay, I'll talk about what is it. I'll just define it first. I'll explain why is it, and I'll give you some examples. So if you think about it, this is actually a standard kind of essay writing structure. I'm explaining what is it, I'm explaining why it is important, and I'm giving you examples, of course. And then at the end of the lesson, I will give you a overall significance, which, if you think about this, is also how you write essays. Okay. So first things first, what is appeasement? Okay, to appease means to pacify or to placate, to say somebody, okay, relax, relax, to calm them down. Pacify, think of a pacifier for a baby, a child who is crying, a toddler who is crying. You give him a pacifier so that he will calm down, so that there'll be less noise, there'll be less conflict. Okay, but importantly here, I think this is a type. This is not a type. Acceding means to give in to their demands. Okay, so when we take this concept and we apply it to the bigger picture, then appeasement becomes a diplomatic and political policy, which is to say, I work on concessions, I give in to you, I have agreements, okay? Concessions are things which a compromise, shall we say, an agreement, okay? That you give to somebody who is acting up. So in this case, it is Britain and France. We see that Hitler is acting up, right? We know that he might want to trigger some sort of conflict. So he say, okay, I'll give you what you want. I'll give you a bit of what you want. Okay, we saw that in the Sudetenland incident in Czechoslovakia. Okay, so that is what it is. I would like you to take a moment at this point. If you are not sure, read through again, look at the textbook, then proceed. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is to go through. This is Neville Chamberlain. He was the Prime Minister of Britain, and he was a great believer in appeasement because he thought that preventing war is a good thing, which is true. This is I'm going to explain how appeasement works. Okay, this is the core concept of appeasement. If you can master this, you will understand the whole chapter, or rather this part of the chapter. Okay, so it is a cycle which keeps going and going. So let me take you through it. First, the first thing that Hitler will always do is to be aggressive. Okay, so we know that there was a build-up. We know that he invaded people. We know that he broke the Treaty of Versailles, right? Oops, sorry. So all these actions, okay? So all these kind of things immediately sends a message that, hey, Hitler is getting, he's getting ants in his pants. He might do something that threatens the balance of the world, or that threatens peace, right? So this is not what the other countries want, which is why we then moved into a reaction, and so the other nations, specifically the great powers, they take action of appeasement rather than combat Hitler, rather than go and confront him with troops. Okay, so in this sense, appeasement, they allow him to do what he wants. So the thinking is this: if I let Hitler take like 2 pieces of land, is better than letting him take 10 pieces of land and starting a war. Okay, that is the thinking behind it. So what is the result? The result is that Hitler succeeds, right? German expansion. So now Germany gets a little bit more powerful. We know that when they were expanding, it's about land and resources and manpower, right? So if you think about it, now if I'm Hitler, remember previously in the last lesson I talked about the testing water analogy. So if you think about it, it's like Hitler going in there, then he tests the water in the swimming pool. Hey, it's not cold. I can go further. Okay? So the keyword that I would like you to practice using is emboldened. Okay, by a lack of response, let's say, hey, nobody stops me. What does it tell me? It means that I can keep going. Okay, it's like if you eat a cookie from the cookie jar, even though you were told not to and nobody stopped you, what message does it send? It means that you can continue eating cookies, except this time you'll take 2. Okay? I say this because I do that all the time at home. But anyway, what happens is that this whole thing then repeats itself. So because he's emboldened, what happens is that he's aggressive again. We get, except this time it is increased aggression, which then again results in appeasement, and then it continues. So if you think about it, this will basically lead to greater aggression. So what we actually see is an increasing intensity of aggression from Hitler. Okay, even though, so if, despite this, nobody is stopping him. Of course, this is a very good question. The question is, how come the Allies didn't stop him, even though it's so obvious that Hitler is getting worse and worse? So there are a whole bunch of reasons. Okay, I'm going to go through them. I will skim through weaknesses of the League of Nations very briefly, but the rest of them are you just need to be able to explain them. All right. So first and foremost, there is the fear of another major war. We must remember World War I ended in 1918, right? Now, it might not seem like a long time to you, but it's not even 20 years, okay? And furthermore, in the 1920s, we had the Great Depression. So it's 2 consecutive decades of terrible things. And if you are the world leader who is going to launch a war against Hitler, you know, that is not going to be popular with your people, okay? And nobody wants to continue fighting another war, which is going to result in a huge amount of deaths. So that is why the logic is that, look, if I let Hitler take, you know, maybe a little bit more land, that's better than sparking another world war. Okay. Also, it was assumed that the League of Nations would stop them. However, we know that it did not. Okay. So because the League of Nations was not able to do anything, that's why individual nations had to take things into their own hands, and appeasement is their policy of choice. Okay, in the same sense, they are to blame for their own mistakes. Okay, now this point is about buying time to we know that Germany was rebuilding, right? We know that we went through militarization, so on and so forth. However, when you go to war, you know, it's not only that Germany was the only country that went to war. Britain and France were involved. Everybody else needs to rebuild their militaries and their economies. You know, you can't go to war if your military is in shambles. So in part, the reason why they did not stop Hitler militarily is because their own resources were not ready. Okay? Now, this is an interesting point. Remember at the very start of the year, we were looking at the treaty and we were saying that, was it fair? Was it justified? Was it fair, right? And we concluded that it was definitely very, very, very harsh. Though we could see that there was some value in the Treaty of Versailles, we did see that it was very, very harsh on Germany. And this viewpoint was actually shared by many politicians. It was genuine sympathy, okay? And they really did believe that Hitler, we shouldn't have punished him so hard. So the logic is this: if Hitler is going to take back a bit of what actually belongs to him, then all right, I guess we could give it to Germany, okay? And in fact, they're very optimistic. They actually believe that it would prevent another war. They believe that Hitler would be satisfied in some way, which really leads to the next point, which is that Neville Chamberlain, who is the British PM, right? He really thought that Hitler would stop. Okay, Hitler said, "Let's change the Treaty of Versailles." Said, okay, we can negotiate about that. Okay. We do, however, have the benefit of hindsight, and we can see the great pattern of Hitler's movement, which we have been studying, and we can see that Hitler's rule is that, remember, he wanted Greater Germany, and we know that the way that he handled matters in Germany speaks of his evil and his absolute nature. He cannot accept any other kind of system of doing things. We know that what Hitler really wants is to control Europe and potentially the whole world, okay? In fact, there is this book by Philip K. Dick, and you can read. It's called The Man in the High Castle. It is a story of what happens when the premise is, what if Nazi Germany had won World War II, okay? And finally, the fear of communism. Think of it as the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So we have Britain and France, and we have Hitler, and we have communism. So Britain and France, they don't like communism. At the same time, Hitler says that I also don't like communism. So therefore, Britain and France believe that Hitler was maybe on their side, if not a friend, then an ally of convenience, and say, okay, it's not so bad if we have Hitler between us and Soviet communism, okay? So at this point, I am going to go through an example of appeasement. How do we know that appeasement took place? All right. So I would like to point you to the Anglo-German naval agreement. Anglo referring to the British. So this was a treaty between the Germans and the British. Okay. So at first, the Treaty of Versailles said that Germany, no subs, only 6 ships, which is quite a pathetic amount. But the British then signed this thing with the Germans, which just said that, hey, guys, you can have as many submarines as us, and you can have 1/3 of our fleet. Tonnage refers to the total weight, okay? It's basically how you calculate how powerful a ship is. The heavier the ship, the more powerful it is, okay? So why is this important? Is because, in effect, if you think about it, the British are also ignoring the Treaty of Versailles. They are sending a message to the Germans saying, all right, you're a very poor thing. Maybe you can have more warships. You shouldn't have so many. You should have 1/3 of mine. But, okay, I can give this to you. Okay? So, clearly it shows that a softening of the British stance. It is not so hardcore. Okay? So, why did they do this? Okay? Why? Because they hoped that the Germans, if I let you do this, don't be so upset, don't do anything rash, okay? So at the same time, they were okay, but we should still have some limits, okay? But as you can tell, this is it's contradictory to what the British originally set out to do, which caused many people to be very upset, okay? But what we must really take away here is the second point on this slide, which is to say that what is the message that it sent to Hitler? It basically told him that, look, the West, the Britain and France, they are actually willing to give in to me. They will give in if I push hard enough. All right? So that is an example of appeasement. Of course, there are more, but please go and have a look at them. Remember the Abyssinian crisis. which we looked at the start of the year, that is also important. Go and look at it as an example of appeasement. Okay. So now let's have a look at the overall conclusion. Let me just talk through it, then I'll show you a diagram. So we know that Hitler was very aggressive and eventually he would go down this path where he's going to invade Poland. We know that invasion of Poland itself is simply a trigger, it is a build-up. Okay, but why was he doing this? It is because the Allies didn't stop him because they were following appeasement. Okay, and all this was taking place in Europe, where the situation is not good. So let's think about it. Remember, I talked about Jimmy the Camel before. Okay, so we have a pyramid, and here we have the underlying factor. The context, okay? So we know we have the Treaty of Versailles, we have post-World War I Europe, and we know that the situation is volatile, it can blow up at any time. It is tense, nobody wants war, okay? At the same time, we have this factor of Hitler, who is being very, very aggressive. He's contributing. And there is also another factor which is interacting, which is appeasement of the great powers. And this interaction allows Hitler to continue his aggression. Which, and the tip of the pyramid, the tip of the spear, so to speak, is what does this cause? This is the invasion of Poland, which triggers the war. So if you look at it, there are three factors. We notice that how did we get to the top of the pyramid? Let me use a different color. How do we get to this point? It's actually the interaction which causes it. That is how I can explain the excuse me, sorry, the relationship between my different factors. Okay, Hitler's expansion alone is not going to cause the war. We must also recognize that it was appeasement that encouraged Hitler further. All right. So that is where we will end. I would like to remind you that all the PowerPoint slides are available on the Google Drive. At the end of the PowerPoint slides, you should also see a whole list of graphic organizers, which is basically a big idea. It just puts it in a form which you can, at one glance, check all the factors. Okay. Remember also, you can always do your mind maps. I will go through this in class as a form of revision. All right. So that concludes the chapter, and then now it is time for us to work on essays and things like that. Okay. We are done.